And we are live once again with the Think Fitness Life podcast. We have a very special episode today that we're going to be discussing mushrooms and bees, mycelium, fungus, Paul Stamets, and save the bees, save the world, save our crops. But before we get started, Eric has a little bit of news for us.
Coming in.
Take it away.
In the Journal of Medical Microbiology, study out of the University of Surrey, green tea could hold the key to reducing antibiotic resistance. Many people don't know that we're starting to come to a society where a lot of our treatments for certain bacteria and strains are actually becoming resistant to the antibiotics we're giving them. So the research was of EGCG, which is epigallocatechin. I believe that's how you pronounce it. It is one of the powerful antioxidants in green tea that makes it so potent, but it actually helps control and helps flip back the antibiotic resistant bacteria. So it actually enhances the aztreonam, which is part of the medication, the activity of that, which is, I assume that's an enzyme. Combined together, it has a greater effect against bacteria. And they've done many research of this on certain species, animals, and it's getting to more human trials and human health, but it's going to go a long way of showing how important this stuff is with adding to medications and how it can be beneficial for us. Now, the reason it stood out to me is because as a society, we're creating all this medication, antibiotics, penicillin, which we'll get into, which is all great stuff. But our bodies are taking it in and these bacteria are getting resistant to it. So it's creating this barrier so it can stay alive and we're still sick. Big problem. But we will find out today that with certain molecules, natural, made from the world, one of your favorite things that you kind of introduced to me, that if we add this to our lives, we can actually have a better immune system, a better neurological system. We can function better. We can actually help fight certain diseases, bacterias, viruses with the help of the so-called mycelium and mushroom. It's all grown in nature. These antioxidants are built into these plants that are very crucial for our survival.
Yeah, I mean, if you just understand the networks of systems on this planet, and we talk about kingdoms, and we have an animal and a plant kingdom, and fungus is a whole separate kingdom, and you're talking about the foundation for life because the timeline is such that 13.8 billion years ago there's a big bang and all these particles came together and that created our galaxy, and then 4.5 billion years ago these particles came together and created the Earth. And for a while it wasn't thought that anything really was around until 700 million years ago. We thought that was the plants. That was kind of what our fossil records showed, was 700 million years ago for plants. And then people were about 650 million years ago. And then until, I guess, a couple of years ago, they found fossilized in lava. They found, at 1.4 billion years ago, they found mushrooms, and 2.4 billion years ago, they found mycelium on lava. And just a little background is the kingdom of fungi. It's another eukaryote. It's another animal plant type of mass. And in the end, since fungus came before us and was the foundation for life, we are just walking fungal bodies. But a mushroom is essentially just the flower of the mycelium, and the mycelium is just an extension of the hyphae of the fungi, or the extension of the branches of the fungi. This includes yeast, molds, mushrooms, and the you can, if you look at now a mushroom and you understand the mycelium networks through the soil, right off the bat, we know that 30% of our soil is fungal. Like if you take a soil sample right in your backyard or somewhere, 30% of it is fungal. So the mushroom is essentially like a flower portraying itself outside of these mycelium networks that are already intertwined underneath the Earth's crust and surface. So the mushroom has a lifespan of a couple of days, and it just flowers up and usually kind of dissipates or becomes soil again or nutrients for another animal. So it's pretty fascinating in some of the studies they've shown, and Paul goes into great detail with. When you understand how these networks are operating with one another and for other life, other plant life or other animal life. And it's really fascinating when you get down to the science of it. And I really recommend anyone who's really interested in this topic, Paul Stamets, Stamets, and he has a interview with Joe Rogan on Joe Rogan's podcast, and he also has a interview most recently that came out on Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Radio podcast. And he's just really wonderful to listen to. He's an author, and he's studies mushrooms and myceliums in the old growth forest. And that's just a little background on the mycologist himself, Paul Stamets. He's an advocate of medicinal fungi, and so that's a little background. So we know that fungus is the oldest thing. And then the next bit of information that will help people understand the levity of this topic is that the largest, so we already determined that the oldest mass is a mycelium culture. The largest living organism is a mycelium culture in the old growth forest in Oregon. And it's about 2,200 acres of
one organism. That's one, right?
It's pretty big, yeah. Exactly. Yep. Just a mycelium culture is what they called that. So I don't know if that's necessarily even
comprised of these millions of pores and cells, correct?
Yes. So not necessarily the fleshy part that could be considered a mushroom. That's the definition of a mushroom, is it has like a fleshiness to it. So the mycelium is going to be more of the networks underneath, like you can think of roots of a tree, essentially.
That's a lot of stuff that most people don't see. So the thin filaments, the spores that start to make up mold or whatever, that makes and then starts creating the network. So you're not going to go see this giant mushroom like, hey, look at that thing. Pretty cool.
Right.
It's just so people get an idea. That would be awesome. And I'm sure you're going to see traces of mushrooms, but that is, what did you say, the biggest one in
the largest organism
Pacific
in the world?
Northwest here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
2,200 acres. And, he goes on to kind of even, Paul and Joe discuss a little bit about why they think that they were avoided. And I think it's interesting to note how powerful these medicines are, these plants are, these funguses are, and how they go on to say ephemeral. And it's true. They have great benefits in some regards in certain types, and they have great risks in certain types. So because of that, we tend to avoid, and there's fear. But another reason is because in a lot of traditional societies, a particular type of mushroom with an active ingredient called psilocybin was a way for people to tap into the world, tap into nature, tap into their spiritual self. And this is along the lines of like peyote and ayahuasca, and really looked at it in a negative way. But they've been preserving mushrooms in honey for a long time, And that's what actually set the stage for psychoactive meads to be produced, because anytime you are, you're going to get fermentation of the alcohol, so you're going to get some alcohol as well. And people were having these far out experiences that were really profound, but really giving them better insight into themselves and into the world and into their spirit. And I think that's a big fork in the road that led us to where we are now, where it's just 2019, and it's um, being looked at other than just a substance one class drug, which means that there's no medicinal purpose whatsoever. And at least now people are getting DEA licenses to study this stuff, and I think it is important. We can't just take what we want. We just take penicillin and then be like, all right, well, yeah, the rest of fungus is bad. Like, no, we need to learn about it.
Right, and that's for certain types of mushrooms and fungus, correct? The medication,
Correct.
because
Correct.
most people, believe it or not, they have had mushrooms before. Whoever's been on penicillin, it's the household name, but that's basically made from a mushroom. It helps suppress the immune system and can also stimulate it. So we've seen that actually. And some people, it's interesting. Some people are allergic to penicillin, or some people build up a resistance to it. So I had strep when I was a kid a lot. I built up a tolerance to penicillin. So after a while, penicillin doesn't work. To this day, penicillin, if I take it, it really won't work. So that's kind of the interesting aspect we have of kind of going back to the news I had about bacteria and the resistance. At what point are we putting all this good stuff in, but this bacteria is mutating? Do we have to start finding different forms of mycelium and mushrooms to help us uh, with new medications? And that's one of the big things nowadays is what they say about over, I think over 300 have health purposes, and half of them are trying to be used for medicational purposes, which is great.
Like
Yeah.
already.
Um,
Interesting.
Obviously,
Okay. Because yeah,
the
go ahead.
the psilocybin one is a whole different kind of, I don't want to say breed, but a whole different animal. I can't even say animal. A whole different
Yeah, a whole
beast,
different
right? Yeah.
fungi.
So the back and forth of what you were kind of talking about is interesting. Is people have different reactions. Not all of them are good, and not all of them are bad. So I know some people who've taken mushrooms and they've had a very bad experience, and mentally it's kind of screwed them up, along with what psychedelic drugs can do. And that was the interesting that kind of Paul was going through is, yeah, there's this divide, but people have to realize there's going to be good and bad reactions to this. Like it's all about how your
Right,
mindset
like
is. So
anything else.
at what point do we can't let this thing just go rampant and people are having bad experiences and creating, whatever they want to create through different communities or pushback or whatever.
They did a really profound study, and they did a retroactive um, results from this study. So basically, they had people experiment with mushrooms, and like 10 years later, they went back and asked them and surveyed them and things like that. And in terms of collateral damage, meaning damage that, or collateral effects, good or bad, that made a more permanent augmentation or adaptation, change, whatever. There was a large percentage of people who had positive benefits that they said changed their lives for the better. And then the people who had bad experiences, it didn't last more than that one day. Yeah, they had a bad experience, they had a bad night, they had a bad trip, but nothing was profoundly changed about them in a negative way. And he goes on to actually talk about another study of recidivism, people getting out of jail and committing more crimes, and having my experience with psilocybin reducing rates for recidivism by 20 to 30%. And then he has another one that he talks about referencing PTSD in war veterans. And I want to get into a little bit more of the studies behind that and what he talks about. But I just have probably just like three other interesting points I want to bring up before we get there. So one of them, 23 primates use mushrooms. So it's in our genetic pool, so to speak, right? There's 5 million types of fungi, and for every 1 millimeter, sorry, for every 1 meter of a tree root, there's 1 kilometer of mycelium networks. Pretty insane. Um, yeah. And the idea is that we want to be able to interface with these networks. And the last little fact I want to spit out before we get into more about psilocybin and some of these specific studies is penicillin actually is accredited to tipping World War II in our favor, so that we could actually combat against sickness. So it's pretty
It's all about
interesting.
all about sickness, and that's the great thing nowadays. And people might, you're not going to see it in, you don't have to get a prescription to get mushrooms. There's a couple companies out there that have these mushrooms, and there's probably 4 or 5 main ones that I'm sure people hear about, and it's going to be in these certain blends. So there's mushroom coffee, there's mushroom powders that you can add to smoothies and stuff. And the big ones you're going to hear are the chaga, reishi, cordyceps, turkey tail, lion's mane. Those all
Lion's
have
mane.
very beneficial effects and have been studied greatly. Yeah,
And they
and
have
they're still
lots of
being
studies
studied.
to
So
support them. Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
like, you take a reishi, it's going to have a relaxation, calming effect. I mean, it's not going to be instantaneous, but that mushroom's going to help. Cordyceps can help with VO2 max, increase the O2 output that you're going to have, which is great. And if more people are getting on this and they start exercising, it's like a twofer. We'll talk lion's mane. I live in one of the areas up in New England where lion's mane is one of the most popular one. But we're
Is it
talking,
really?
yeah,
That's awesome.
like Maine, Vermont, like that's where it grows. So a lot of times these mycelium grow in these forests where there's a lot of, there can be wetness and just a lot of stuff that's right for it to grow. So wet, dry, sunlight, oxygen. That's why the Pacific Northwest, where it's so rainy season and wet out there, it's really good. You're not going to see a lot of mycelium right in the desert, but that's why we're kind of one of the hot spots of it in the U.S. But we're talking
Huh.
nervous system. They're looking at
Right.
helping to treat Parkinson's or memory support with these certain substances that are out in nature. And I don't know how long ago. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of years. These mushrooms have been used as your traditional herbal medicine, and I think it's something that we need to kind of go back to and get back into the realm of using them and more often. No, it's funny because a lot of times when people are like, oh, or I'll say, hey, there's mushrooms in my smoothie, and they'll be like, what are you talking about? And when I say it, they're thinking, oh, is it just a mushroom you bought at the store? And I said, no, it's certain type of fungus or mushrooms that grow in the wild that are very health beneficial. And people look at me like I'm crazy, but you
Yeah.
know, like I said,
Yeah.
research
I
backs it,
do.
and if you read enough research and the conclusions are there, it's a no brainer. Why not?
Yeah. No, they've shown a lot of interesting things with the immune system, with the brain, with neurons, with the myelin sheath being protected. It's another thing on this planet that we were born with and we have life because of, and now we're just trying to avoid. It's kind of like how we've worked our way into um, sheltering ourselves from the sun way too much, and then we have vitamin D issues. It's just like anything else. We have to learn to coexist with the world around us, not just avoid what we don't know or don't understand, and just take what we think is best for us.
Well, that's the thing,
Um,
right?
and I
Because it's
think
going to be just like having vitamin D deficiency, or we can use some of these vitamins as an antioxidant properties. Mushrooms should be in that conversation, 100%. I mean,
oh, totally, totally,
the main fact that these things are
and
huge adaptogens is just unbelievable. And then for most people, or for people listening who don't know, it's just a non-toxic plant that is going to help the body deal with stress of all kinds, physical, chemical, biological. So you're going to eat this thing and it's adaptogen. Your body's going to help adapt to it. It's like,
and different mushrooms are known for having different compounds to help in different ways, and that's what's so great about it. It's still being
correct.
studied, and for anyone who's still looking for a supplement to make sure they're covering all their bases. I'm in no way affiliated with Paul Stamets, but he has Host Defense, and he has a like a Stamets 7. It's 7 different types of mushrooms, and I take like I'll do the Stamets 7 every day for a couple months out of the year, and then I'll do like an immunity support one every couple months out of the year. They are kind of expensive. I do like to keep my overhead low, but I do want to cover all my bases, especially because I have ulcerative colitis. So I just want to make sure everything's functioning properly on a cellular level. But yeah, he goes specifically into Paul discusses about lion's mane treatment for Alzheimer's and muscular dystrophy, and there was a particular mice study with the demyelination of cells. They induced uh, what's it called? Like neurodegenerative gene. So basically, they set up the scenario where mice were able to get to this maze and find the food, and they could get through it every time. They got really accustomed to it. And then, upon introducing this gene that demyelinated their cells, they were no longer able to find the food again, and they were all getting lost, and some of them weren't even trying. And then 2 weeks after introducing lion's mane, they started to be able to find the food again. Upon sacrificing the mice in an autopsy, they showed that the brain, the ones that were introduced to the lion's mane, were actually growing new pathways around where the old neural networks were. So they were literally regrowing connections to get the system to work the way it should and help the animal the way it should. And then there's another study, this one specific with psilocybin. They had a mice and a toy in the middle of the room. And um, they would touch it like a certain number of times. Then they would induce them with, uh, I think, like basically like a clinical depression. And they wouldn't. Some of them would still touch the toy, but then others were just not interested at all. And then upon introducing psilocybin along with lion's mane, they just lit up. They were so curious. They were so creative. They were trying to touch the toy. They were so eager to touch every new toy, and they would have a lot more touch points. So there's just there's a lot of evidence here for stuff to really come out more and more about the effects of
Yeah,
mushrooms and our neural
that's the big
pathways.
one. Is
And
how can this benefit
yeah,
medicinal purposes, or how can this benefit people? And they're looking at effective in treating tons of things. I mean, we're talking cancers, diabetes, hypertension, infectious disease, high blood pressure. The list goes on and on of the basic stuff that we see every day. People come in and these are the top five, I will say maybe top 10 risk or cause of mortality in this country. And these mushrooms can fight that. It's, you know,
Right. It's like we already kind of have what we needed on this earth. It's like a multiple choice exam. It's like the answer's somewhere on this exam. Like
Right.
we don't have to like make up an element or go to outer space to find what we need. Like we just have to be more open to understanding um, what we already have. And quite frankly, I mean, really, it kind of separated people who were intellectually curious from the people who were just like partiers and drug addicts by vilifying it and putting it in this category that it has like they have it ranked higher than cocaine or
Wait,
opioids.
what do
Like,
they have ranked
come
higher?
on, the classification of mushrooms is more
All
serious.
right.
Like psilocybin is more serious than cocaine or heroin. Where cocaine or heroin are considered to be, they have some medicinal purposes. Psilocybin is currently classified as zero uh, medicinal purposes. So it's technically classified as a stronger substance drug, and it's just like, come on, like it's so about locus of control at that point. Like, okay, we don't know about mushrooms. We're just gonna say they're really bad for people. They shouldn't do them. But if you want your Adderall or you want your painkillers, like here you go, we'll sell them to you in a pretty little package in different colors, and you don't even have to go find the plant yourself. You know, so I don't know. Just that stuff frustrates me because it just doesn't ever seem like the big players in the game use their power for good rather than evil. So that's actually one thing we're going to get into is Paul Stamets has a mission to help save bees, and he doesn't want to release it yet because he's really afraid that like he's working on this stuff in the background. He's going to like launch all these bee feeders out there, and he's going to make 10,000 citizen scientists, but he wants to do this in an impactful way, kind of under the radar, because he's afraid that like a big company like Roundup, right? They're just going to come in, buy it, and then just greenwash it, just get rid of it. So it really is a battle between people who want to preserve the environment and people who just want to
Yeah, but
profit off the environment.
I kind of want to
And it's
backtrack just
funny.
a little bit, just so we don't confuse people. Was what Matt's talking about is when he's comparing it to like heroin and cocaine. That's not just the mushroom blends you're gonna find on the health market or at your vitamin shop. We're talking different classifications, and I think when we're talking about this, like mushrooms as the drug, we'll probably have to call them like shrooms or something because technically they're all right.
Well,
Right. So we have to be very specific
psilocybin
because we kind of
technically.
veered really quick, and I don't want to lose people going from like the health benefits of good ones and tell them like no, they're bad and banned. So like, I just
No, that's why I was just saying
so
like
like that
psilocybin
one.
is still technically
Other
classified
ones
as a higher
are the
drug
in the ones in
category.
the what would you say the Stamets? Is that a pill? The Stamets or is that a powder? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a
So
well. He puts it in a
yeah,
little
like that
capsule. He
stuff.
grinds it up in a powder and puts it in there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
What I take,
those are
I
all
have the
legal,
Four
right?
Sigmatic powder, so that's all fine. I mean, you can go online, you can get all that stuff shipped, and it'll be there by the end of the week. So it's more the other,
Yeah, well, we can't provide psilocybin for you. Nature can go provide that for you. You
but
can go
don't
find
just go
that in the
eating
woods.
mushrooms, please.
Yeah, well, I'm not recommending you, but I'm just saying it's nature.
But that's the thing.
Nature
It's there's
provides
so
that
many
stuff,
of these,
not us.
and it's not just like okay, there's an animal. We know that's protein. We know that's meat. It's 100% guaranteed that they're amino acids. These mushrooms, or these mycelium, there's just so much, and we don't know the effect of all of them, or we probably don't even know exactly all of them categorized in their own genome. It's amazing, but I definitely think that
Yeah, like there's
right,
so much to
and
learn
that's where
about.
I
That's why
think
it's fun.
where the psilocybin is a little bit on almost yeah, it's not like out, but it's because there's just such a there's some research out there, but I think they need more just to confirm like is this going to be percent wise? Uh, I don't know. I don't know. I think it has to be 100%, but is this going to be 80% where we want it to be? compared to like, oh, it could be 50-50. Now, I don't know the exact percentages. I'm just kind of speculating of why they haven't used it yet or really looked into the clinical use of it.
Well, because they've been studying it since like the early '60s, but
Right. And,
it's
and
just
that's
highly
that's the problem,
variable.
unfortunately.
The setting, the individual,
Like you're going to go
but
against a drug that's pretty variable that you're like, okay, we know it's going to do this. This beta blocker is going to do this compared to like psilocybin where you're like, well, it could do
right.
that. It could do this. Like that risk is too much.
Well, that's the thing is they've proven it to have so many benefits that they can't just pinpoint it to one thing. So you wouldn't be able to say like, oh, you have a diagnosis of this. Well, then you need psilocybin.
Which is
So
tough.
it's
And
just it's highly controversial as well. But there's so many profound benefits and studies out there that show um, in conjunction with lion's mane even to having a better effect. And we know that psilocybin replaces serotonin. Um, it can overcome the fear response, to overcome any PTSD people are having. And a lot of people talk about kind of these shamanistic leaders or these leaders of these villages having this profound ability. Um, but we don't need to go into psilocybin too much. Again, um, it's much more at the brink of the science in terms of understanding a healthy amount to try under a controlled setting,
we
and that's why we can't. We're not going to sit here and tell anybody should try it or anything. But I have no problem telling people that I've tried it and I've had a profound experience from it, and I have a better outlook because of it, and I feel like I'm more in tune with myself because of it. And this was back in high school, middle school. Sorry, mom, but it's crazy looking back and hearing all this stuff now and being like, yeah, like it really was a big fork in the road that sort of changed the way I think about things. And we have plenty of receptors for psilocybin specifically, and what's also really interesting to me is um, I love the theory that through epigenetics and neurogenetics, basically gene signaling, turning them on and off, that over millions and millions of years and millions of mushrooms that had neurotropic benefits, that we created neural networks for the capacity of learning, language, cognition, making more tools. And you're basically thinking about primates roaming cow fields or fields in general, and the only thing they can eat are mushrooms that pop out of poop of other animals, and that's where a lot of these mushrooms come out. And not all of them are going to have an active ingredient of psilocybin, but not all of them are going to be necessarily one strain either. So I do enjoy hearing some of the mycologists and biologists and evolutionists talk about kind of our evolution and our growth of our brains and the way that they grew so rapidly in a relatively short period of time
Yeah,
compared
that
to
is a
everything else on the
interesting
timeline.
theory that was brought up, and I've heard a couple people talk about it. I think Jordan Peterson's talked about it. That kind of theory. No, just saying like those theories are really cool about, and that's the first time I really heard about that theory. And there's so much out there about like that course, and it was just like hearing that theory. It's like wow, it makes you think that that's definitely a possibility. And
And that's all we're trying to do, right? We're not trying to say one thing or the other. We just want to ask questions, make people think about this stuff, and then find the right solution that makes sense for them. For me personally, I'm good with the stay up at 7. I'll take my 2 capsules every morning, and I think I've covered all my bases. Later down the line, maybe I'll try dosing with psilocybin. I've hear a lot of people like Ben Greenfield, Dave Asprey, Paul Stamets. These are other greats, or I've mentioned Paul before, but Dave Asprey and Ben Greenfield are big and have their own uh, fitness following and health following, and they've talked about microdosing with these stuff and having spiritual experiences. And maybe later down the line that'll be something I get into. But at the same time, I think a big takeaway to understand is the prerequisites to animal life, the prerequisites to plant life. And somewhere in our pattern, our behavior, our nutrition routine, um, we have to be consuming fungus and some type of a beneficial mushroom of some kind, because there's just so many profound examples of them being beneficial on cellular level.
You know how
On
many,
the cellular
you know how many people you'd be like, all right, you got to eat a fungus today. They're going to be like, yeah, right. You're crazy.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is, I mean, I hated mushrooms growing up. I hated most vegetables growing up. But
Well, see,
uh,
I think that's where it's great, right? Because you have your traditional mushrooms that you get at the store, which they're still mushrooms, they're still fungus, but the impact of benefit from other ones or other sort of fungi is like way better. You know,
yeah,
it's
well, yeah. It's kind of like how but we fucked that up. We just mass produced one thing and
oh,
we're
of
lazy
course.
as fuck.
Like
Like we did it with bananas, we did it with avocados, we did it
right.
with cows in America, and that's what we just fuck up the whole process. Like we
What's
need that you need diversity. You need diversity. I'm sorry, everyone who's a closet racist, who's our listeners. If we have any, I hope I offended you. Um, but it's just like, come on, people. Like, why would we try to just shortcut the process and be like, this is the only banana you can buy. This is the only avocado you can
this is
buy.
the only one?
You can only get milk from A1 cows. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's just
which is
asinine.
great. But and the one of the big ones that people probably hear is the shiitake one. It has those reasons it has the highest levels of vitamin D of any we'll call it plant food, even though they're not really plants, but people consider them plant foods. So you're still going to get a good dose of certain vitamins and minerals with these. So it's like you shouldn't avoid them.
Right.
Like it's crazy, you know. This the world always provides, and it always finds a ways to provide more and more for people. And yeah, like you said, we kind of take that for granted, and we over and mass produce all this stuff. Which, and I'm not saying like now, obviously mushrooms are popular; they're going to be mass produced, and it is what it is. But it's just this earth will continue to provide for human beings as long as we're on it, whether it's animals in the field, plants in the field, freaking mushrooms growing out of wood on grass. It's awesome that we live on this planet and are able to enjoy it. But I think pe- people need to understand that there's just more than what's in a grocery store. There's more than just chicken, bananas, apples. I mean, I like all that stuff. Though that stuff is great, but there's a whole world of foods out there that are just under the radar or not really available.
Well, what comes to mind after what you just said was how I think it's called PECA or PICA, where some pregnant women will just start eating dirt, and it's because their bodies are craving essential minerals and essential vitamins, and we just because our nomenclature is when we say food, we think of like an apple, or we think of something in a Lunchables package, or something in a wrapper in general, doesn't mean that something isn't actually food that we just don't fully understand yet, because we don't have the right neural pathways to understand the capacity of that. Or we're just ignorant, stubborn, which is a nice way of what I said
I
before.
might go with the second one, definitely.
Yeah, just be blunt about it. Well, so let's go on to mushrooms and bees a little bit, because this is a little bit about like a pioneered approach, and we want to be hoorah on board. And bees are super important. We can go into a little bit of facts about them. They are going to allow for 30% more yield on all crops. They've been decimated since the 1980s because of a virus that started, and since then their homeostasis has just been constantly disrupted. Um, and the sad truth is that one bee who has a virus goes and pollinates a flower that then a bunch of other bees come in contact with will now have strains of that virus. They bring it back to the hive, and boom. So, we don't need to sit here and list the facts of our bee population and how it's depleted, but it's definitely depleted, and it plays a huge role into the foods that we eat and the food that everyone would call food, not just the dirt in the ground. And there's a polypore mushroom or a reishi type mushroom. And I think he also calls it an ampadu mushroom. Don't quote me on those, but they extend the life of bees. So normally bees live for 30 to 40 days, but this extends the life and it also protects their immune system. So they're not getting their homeostasis disrupted as readily, and they're actually able to live longer than their average lifespan anyway. Um, the purpose of what Paul goes into is really profound, and really, I highly recommend if you have the extra time to listen to those two podcasts, but the one especially on Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Radio with Paul Stamets. And he just talks about how he has a company dedicated to it. It's called bemushroomed.com. It's BEE mushroomed ed.com. And he's giving the first 10,000 kits away for free because he can't charge you because of a classification in federal law, like about using mushrooms as feed or as feed for something. It's really weird, but that's why he's giving them away. And he's estimated that it's going to take about 100 million of these bee feeders to basically realign the disruption that had been caused since the virus had started back in the 80s, and help protect and enhance a bee's immune system one by one, essentially. And he's just trying to get these kits out. He's trying to blast out the first 10,000 for free. So go check out bemushroomed.com. He's really on a great endeavor. And he's just really trying to take environmental change and climate change into his own hands. I mean, he talks about how farms in the Midwest have lost anywhere from 40 to 70% of their bee population, which is going to play a huge role into their crop yields, which is going to play a huge role into their profitability on an economic level. And then they'll probably go to a business, and there's less mouths that they can feed and less mouths of their own to feed. So he's really a genius, and he's ahead of his time for what he's trying to get done with so little resources. At least that's what it seems like from an outsider's perspective, because you would think that if the kind of like the topic that brings people together could be preservation of our own environment and the earth that we live in, our Mother Nature, then you would think that more people would want to get on board to helping this endeavor rather than looking at it as a threat or looking at a way of trying to be economical from it or profit from it. And so that's my little spiel on mushrooms and bees.
Circle of life comes full tilt. That's the interesting thing.
It really is.
Maybe 2 years ago now, there was a good Netflix documentary on bees, or it was like a mini episode of something on why they're so important, and not only for mushrooms, but just for all kinds of pollination. But you just, at first, you're like, this could be a stretch, but you realize that, like, they're one of the biggest producers. Like the almonds that we eat, if we don't have bees, there's no almonds. And you start realizing that, yeah, a lot of these plants around here, or these trees and bushes and flowers, they're not getting cross-pollinated because of that. And bees specifically. So I think it's fascinating, and you get more into the nature and how just everything is integrated and intertwined, and everything serves a purpose, even though some of these bugs and stuff, like, we seem like they don't, but they really do.
There's a story of the old Chinese farmer, and it basically, it's just a 2-minute story. guy comes out one morning and he has this horse, and the town gets together and say, "Oh, that's so great! You have a horse now." And the next day, he goes to find the horse and it's gone. Right, and the village is like, "Oh my gosh, it's so sad that you don't have that horse anymore." And he says maybe, and that was his first reply to the first thing, was just, "Well, maybe." And then the horse came back with like five other horses. And the town's village people said, "Oh my gosh, that's so great! Look at that! You have so many horses now. That's awesome." He says, "Well, maybe." And then his son goes and trains one of the horses and breaks his leg, and the townspeople get together and say, "Oh my gosh, it's so horrible." He says, "Maybe." The next day, the government comes to town to take everybody to war, and they say, "We can't take your son because he has a broken leg." And the townspeople get together and say, "Oh my gosh, that's so great! Good thing you had that injury." And the Chinese man says, "Maybe." And the whole point of the story is that we don't always know the result later down the line from the one impact in the timeline that we notice and that we can see. But if we zoom out and we respected something for the bigger picture of what it is, we don't really know whether it's good or bad. That's what we put on it. But it all seems to work its way out. Nature has its way of working things out on its own terms. I mean, people want to say that forest fires are bad, right? I mean, I remember being in middle school and high school, like forest fires are bad, okay, right? But it's like, well, they're really only bad when they threaten humans because we don't want them there. But really, it's the natural order of life. A forest is dead and depleted. The forest comes on fire, and what are you left with? You're left with carbon. You're left with ash. You're left with this nutrient dense soil for the next forest, for the next growth cycle. So we just can't be anthropomorphic to think that everything revolves around us and it's good or bad relative to us. And we have to understand things for what they are and look at things for what they are. And I think one little example of this is that they've done things to help the honeybee population, right? But they've tried to shortcut it. They said, well, let's just pollinate these flowers. They made these like robot bees. You heard Paul talk about them, the little robot bees, and that was great. But they were killing all the other bees, so it wasn't doing any good. It was actually just ruining the bee population even further. So I just think that's where we kind of missed the boat sometimes, where we were a little too quick to jump the gun on a solution. And whereas instead of saying, "Oh, I have pain in my foot," feels like there's a rock in there. Instead of saying like, "Oh, well, you should just stop your pain receptors from sending signals to your brain that it hurts," we should say, "No, let's find the rock and let's remove it." So I don't know, just that's my little 2 cents rant there. And I'll let you take the mic. I feel like I've been talking too much.
It's good because it's your kind of thing. You've been kind of talking about mycelium and mushrooms for a while, and I think this episode was long overdue. You're just like spilling over, ready to run through the wall here, and I love it. A little hyped up.
Well, the main thing too, just so everyone knows why I'm a little hyped up, is we were supposed to record this 2 days ago. Then a little emergency happened, so we had to postpone it. So I was just kind of like chomping at the bit, and I wanted to make sure I got all the right information in, and didn't want to make it too confusing for people because I'm still confused. And I mean, that's the third time I've listened to the one on Rogan, and that's a 3-hour podcast, or like 2 hours and 45. And that's the second time I heard the one on Dave Asprey. And I could just listen to Paul Stamets talk for hours. He's like a Neil deGrasse Tyson, where the way that their minds have understood this world is so profound, but then they can communicate it. They can explain it on a simplistic level that makes me go, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'm not as dumb as I think." So it's fun. I really like finding great minds out there and just trying to learn and absorb as much as I can. But there's so much more to go out there and understand. So that's why I think, it's really important for us to also say that like these are just topics. We're just introducing topics. We're asking questions. We're bringing some facts to you. We're bringing some reference studies to you. But to do the homework and and figure out how it works in your life is something that nobody else can do for you. And you got to take the reins in your own hand and take control of your life and be your own best advocate. It's my last little tidbit
I'm
there.
all for it. And if you're out there, the world, try some mushrooms, healthy ones, online, blend, get in your coffee, get in your smoothies, drink it plain. I don't care. It doesn't taste great with
I
blended
will
with just
say,
water, but if you got to drink it, you got to drink it.
oh, it's awful. I specifically did the lion's mane mushroom for the first 60 days. That was the first one I ever tried because I always felt slow. I always felt whenever I was in a scenario that I needed to perform that I would have like a word searching issue, and it would be something simple. It'd be the word like research or atmosphere or weather, and I noticed just very subtly that I wasn't having that same issue, and who knows, maybe a little bit of placebo was going into it, but I think it's another piece that people should experiment with, and whether it's dietarily or supplementation, I think it's super important to have some type of fungal body being consumed in your own little microbiome and holobiome. Glimpse into just the surface that we're barely even scratching into in understanding fungus and life. And that's that. So we'll catch you all next week.